Does 13 cameras deserve more than 13 points? Hello and welcome to RotD Review of the Day, and before I start this review, I want to remind everybody that in 1 week's time, October 27th, from noon to 4 Eastern Standard Time, we will be live on location at Alfred University for a 4-hour Halloween special. If you're in the Alfred area, if you're an Alfred University or SUNY Alfred State student, or if you just happen to be in the Western New York area, you want to come on by, we're going to be on the second floor of the Powell Campus Center. We're going to have some giveaways and some contests. You're free to come on camera and join in. And otherwise, if you're outside the area or you don't want to make the trip, please tune in. It's going to be a blast. So moving on, this review today is about the 2015 movie 13 Cameras. The reason I selected this one was because I saw that 14 cameras hit my view, and before I reviewed that one, I kind of wanted more of a baseline, so I'm going to start with 13 cameras and then some point soon move on to its sequel. So where I really wound up with this movie is someplace that's somewhat familiar in recent times with more recent reviews I've done, and that's ultimately what would be a really strong concept, not really fleshing out into an hour-and-a-half long feature-length motion picture. As flawed as it was, I thought that it was also elevated by having a very strong villain character. So to get into more details of what this movie entails and what I liked about it and didn't like about it, let's get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one was very, very basic. It was a couple that moved into a new house, and the landlord that they rent from is this creepy guy that just, Coke bottle glasses and kind of disheveled and always mouth agape and just very, very odd sort. Regardless, they move in and they're somewhat happy. She's pregnant. There's some distance between them, but they seem like they're a happily married couple. But it turns out he's cheating on her and bringing his mistress over to the house and so forth. And we come to find fairly early on, actually, that all of these events that are unfolding with the drama inside the household is being carefully monitored by Gerald, the landlord, the creepy guy. And the reason he's monitoring this is because he has cameras laid out all over the house, nooks, crannies, little holes, just anywhere he can put a camera, and he's watching it from his base station point of view. Ultimately, the problem, I thought, dealt with balance of the different storylines that were going on. For me, the concept of the guy cheating on his wife and so forth was just kind of, I don't know. It was an interesting aspect to throw in there, but it was certainly nothing to revolve an entire movie around. It was a pretty, vanilla, plain Jane guy cheats on his wife kind of thing. And that was like one of the most focused upon aspects of the movie. How well he hides it when his mistress calls at 1 a.m, with how cool he plays it and the steps that he goes through to make it, seem like he's innocent and so forth. And ultimately what we wound up with was something that should have been a frightening look into unconsensual voyeurism, and it turned more into a will he get caught kind of thing, which isn't a horror movie, it's a drama, and not a very strong drama at that. So I gave the plot a 9 out of 25 points. It certainly was coherent. It worked on some levels, but I think that the main focal point was just way too off-center, and the rest of the movie suffered for it. The intent, I gave a 10 out of 25 for a lot of the same reasons that I just mentioned. If you're going for scares, if you're going for disturbing stuff, then having such a deviated plot line really takes away from that. And all the stuff that happens in regards to Gerald and the family and so forth just kind of had a I don't know, almost like the villain drawing out to its logical conclusion kind of thing, as opposed to taking everything and ramping it up and keeping this level of tension going where it should have been. So, 10 out of 25 for the intent. The acting is where this really takes off. The acting job by Neville Archambault, who played the character of Gerald, was phenomenal. I went and tried to look up interviews or something behind the camera of him speaking and him just interacting normally, because I wanted to have a baseline, because the character of Gerald was played so well with his drawl and his mannerisms and so forth. This was a character that, if I were to give any kind of analogy for it, I mean, the guy is really buff, but in a very peculiar way, and I don't know, the menacing figure that he presents is almost like that of a gorilla, and that's not to say, to be at all insulting. It really just reminded me of of actually, say you happen to be inside of an enclosure with, say, a silverback gorilla, and the imposing muscular figure that and the level of gentleness that they could have at first sight, but at the same time you're never really catching your guard down, because if they decide to cross that line, that the consequences of that are not minor. And so that's the impression that I got, and it was really, really well played by Neville, and I couldn't find anything behind the scenes for him to kind of compare, because he played it so well that I wanted to see him just talking to a reporter and talking to them, clean shaven, well dressed, and talking, with proper vocabulary and so forth. It was kind of a pity I couldn't find anything like that. But regardless, I really thought that the acting job by the main antagonist villain was really, really good. And that was one of the big things that this movie did have going for it, was a very strong villain. It was really well established. And Neville was one of the key components that sold that. The technical I gave a 9 out of 25. There really wasn't anything terribly amazing. It wasn't a whole lot terribly wrong, but here's, I think, one of the big things that takes the points away is there was a lot of what I would call missed opportunity with this movie. And that had a lot to do with the plot, and that had a lot to do with the main characters, not Neville, not Gerald, but the couple that were living in the house. It just, with the writing and the acting and so forth, it just seemed like a lot of missed opportunities. And with the technical, I felt the same way. There was a lot of just a really standard camera movement, and you got to see some of the POV, from the cameras that were hidden around the house. But it seems to me that, again, it's the focal point of the movie that really was off the mark. The focal point of the movie should have been the unconsenting voyeurism and the terrifying nature of the character of Gerald that was breaching that level of trust. And I think one of the things on a technical level that could have sold that better would be to have the entirety of the movie shot from the point of view of the hidden cameras. There's really no reason it couldn't have been done that way. I don't know if they didn't think about it or if they thought about it and scrapped the idea, but there were so many different cameras and so many different angles in there that there's no reason we couldn't have wound up with basically a kind of a Paranormal Activity kind of thing, where we watch these characters as they unfold, and perhaps the only shots that we get outside of that point of view are of Gerald in his lair, his little cot and monitors kind of situation there. But if we saw, in one camera, and we got a good layout of the house, say by the third act, we start seeing Gerald in one view crossing a room, and we know from the other view that the character is, behind the wall there. I really think it could have ramped up the dramatic tension, and it also would have lent itself to putting the audience almost in Gerald's shoes of this voyeuristic thing, and lent itself to that level of uncomfortableness. I really there was just one thing after another that really felt like a missed opportunity for me, and the technical was no exception to that. I gave that 9 out of 25. Very serviceable, but nothing that wowed me, and just a lot of stuff they could have done better. That gives us a total score of 45 out of 100 points. I would not dissuade anybody from watching this movie. I thought it was actually worth watching. I'm curious to see what the sequel pulls out of its hat. I'm hoping it does get better. But ultimately what I found was just a movie that had this really strong villain lead and not a whole lot else to it. Just not a lot of meat on them bones. So that should about do it for 13 Cameras. I thank you for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.